nothing really happened. Because Randy, I think that was a bad thing Randy did. Randy and Carson got together, and they decided how they were going to foil Scott from doing it. So they really made it so that Geller couldn't get away with anything. He couldn't bend his spoons or something like that, because they had under observation all the time. And so Geller saw that, and Geller won't do anything if he can't get away with it. Geller, that's why he's never been caught, because he's never going to do anything if he can't get away. He knows he can't get away with it.
But see, a real performer would have had a backup.
Okay,
I always said that about do something. You know?
Okay. Now this is an interesting point that you're making, because there was a parapsychologist, Thelma Moss. You ever hear of her?
I remember Thelma.
Okay. Well, she was had a PhD from UCLA. She had been in theater on stage, and she became a parapsychologist. And I actually have a recording of it. During the height of the Uri Geller business, and right after he was on the Johnny Carson show, she was interviewed on public radio. I think they still have the audio, the tape of it. And they asked her about Uri Geller. She says, well, you know, up until now, he appeared on Johnny Carson show, I always thought Geller, I had no doubts Geller was a fraud.
Yeah.
Because he appeared on the Merv Douglas show several times, the Merv Griffin show several times, the Mike Douglas show several times. And every time it worked, something worked.
Yeah.
And I, in my long experience, know if it's a real psychic, they can't turn it on and off like the faucet. They don't have that control.
Right,
okay. But now, suddenly, Geller appears on the Johnny Carson show, the place where you really want to succeed. And if he was his fraud, he would have done something.
Yeah.
Nothing happened, and I convinced me he's real. So that's different from being a magician.
Yeah.
It's like this thinking of the exception that proves the rule, so to speak, which is completely anti-logical.
Right. But that was her argument, and that's the argument about many people. There's this mixed mediumship, you've heard of that,
Oh, yeah.
right? And mixed mediumship is taken for granted all during the 1800s and even today, that mediums get in the limelight. They're not from the top culture, and that was the kind of attitude they had in Victorian times. They weren't from the top of the culture, so they weren't the highest morals either. So they were only, and most of them were women, see, and the only way they get attention and get fame and money was by producing these strange phenomena. Now, these phenomena aren't under their full control. They're very elusive and evasive. And so, naturally, when something's not happening and the crowd's watching them, they are pushed to try to help it along by cheating a little bit. That's called mixed mediumship.
That was like Sapia Palladino. She said,
that's right.
Sometimes people want it so bad that I'm forced to do tricks, which I think is
in fact, beautiful. She blamed
by the spirits. Right?
Several times. The time she was caught, she blamed the investigators for not being good enough to hold her, keep her from cheating.
I mean, those are the classic dodges, you know.
No lose. You can't lose.
That's right. No, that's the point. The psychics cannot lose.
Right. And it's still true. You can be wrong and be right.
Well, it's even like we've seen John Edward say, if he throws a wild, I saw him say lightning struck somebody in this crowd, or someone got struck by lightning. I thought, wow, that's not an M or a J word. That's a wild guess. Nobody answered, so he berated the crowd. He said, you're going to think of this in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You're going to say, why didn't I say something? You're wrong, I'm right.
Yeah.
Goodbye. He's still...
There was one, just a real quick story. One of the few shows I watched with him, he told this guy in the audience, he said, who's Charlie or something? And the guy goes, I don't know. He says, no, and he kept on the guy. And he said, all right, look, come with me. And he took the guy backstage, and they went to a phone, and he goes, all right, call your mother. And the guy calls his mother, and he says, ask your mother who Charlie is. And he goes, Mom, who's Charlie? And the woman goes, well, there's a guy next door named Charlie. And he goes, you see, I told you this happened.
So they stopped the show?
Yeah. The tape followed him into the room with the telephone. And it was the biggest stretch I ever saw. But then he went with it, and the TV audience, he comes back out, and they're all applauding as he comes back.
Was that John Edward?
Yeah, it was John Edward.
Yeah, there's I just recently, the other day, a few days ago, I think, I did, for some reason, look up Edwards, and there's a guy, one place I found, the guy had taken a complete transcripts of him, and he went step by step. It was very, very, very nicely done.
That's what we're talking about.
Well, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.